Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and I am here thinking about my life in academia and what that was like. It was a good life in certain ways, a little bit stressful in other ways. Um, I was reflecting on the fact that I spent a lot of years in school. I was thinking about that. And I was thinking, gosh, was that worth it? I feel like it was in the sense that it gave me a lot of skills that I can apply that help me to do things today that I probably couldn't have done otherwise. I couldn't do the Black Wealth Boot Camp as well as I do that, uh, without my PhD. Um, so to that extent, I think the years have added value to my life. Now, was it the most efficient use of my time? I don't know. I honestly think that if I were 18 years old today, rather than spending 4 years in college and another 7 years, I guess 7.5 years, working on a PhD, where I did master's degrees and stuff along the way, I probably would have. I would have focused on studying entrepreneurship, becoming a really good entrepreneur. Because if you really understand entrepreneurship, you can learn anything you want to learn, and you can make money in ways that people can't make money when they work for other people. So, with that being said, um, you know, I will say that and people ask me about this because I always sort of go through this conversation about whether or not college, graduate school, getting a PhD, all that stuff makes sense. And I'm not going to say it doesn't make sense, but I'm going to say that it's not always the most efficient way to get quote unquote success, whatever that is. Now, with that being said, I think about my fellow scholars. I think about the young scholars that I meet on a regular basis. I used to be involved with the PhD project, but which is this thing that they do in Chicago every year, where they bring together people that are thinking about getting a PhD in business. I don't go there anymore. I don't. I got a little bit too radical for them, I think. So I don't really get invited to that kind of stuff. And really, honestly, I don't think I'd have time to do it. But I was thinking about the advice that I would give myself if I were a young graduate student today, or a young scholar today, or just even a young person in general who's thinking about being a scholar. Because you see a lot of people who say, I'd love to be a college professor, I'd love to teach if I could. And they don't always necessarily know if it's worth the investment to spend all those years in school trying to get a doctorate. There were some interesting things I learned about academia that surprised me, some of which don't make me happy or proud. Academia is a very elitist kind of place. The snobbery, especially where I was. I was in finance. Finance is a field that tends to be heavily white male, and we make the most money on campus. When I came to Syracuse University, I was actually the highest paid, not just the highest paid assistant professor. An assistant professor is what you are for the first 6 years of your, or 6 or 7 years until you go up for tenure, and then you become an associate. And then after you're an associate for a while, if you're lucky, you might get a chance to be a full professor. I was the highest paid assistant and associate on campus, and I was just an assistant. So, I did pretty well. I made good money, and so I can't complain about that. And I was young, I was single, so it was pretty good. It wasn't bad. Um, Now, here's the thing, though, that I sort of found out about academia that kind of bothered me was, number one, just the general snobbery of the field. I think what that does, that elitism, creates a very narrow mindset. It really just shrinks your thinking, in the sense that because you think you know so much, you end up learning very little. Because you're no longer a student of life, you're no longer a student of the world, you no longer have to adapt and grow in order to survive. You're sort of put in this incubative environment where somehow somebody decides to just give you a bunch of money to work on projects that in many cases don't have much value to humanity. And so you learn how to survive in that little environment. You are caught up in a lot of little petty, silly situations, where you're arguing with the guy down the hall because he got a 2% raise and you got a 1.5% raise, or, something. He gets to teach the 9 o'clock class and you wanted the 9 o'clock class, just little things like that. I mean, I've seen scholars get into these crazy fights over some of the most ridiculous, childish, pathetic issues. And my belief is that when you have real things to worry about, you don't get caught up in childish stuff because you've got real problems to deal with. You're solving real situations. I became a little bit disenchanted with academia, not just for that reason, but also being black in academia. Sometimes it sucks. Um, when I came in at Syracuse University, it was so funny in the business school. The business school had never given tenure to any black person in any department in the last 100 years of existence. Number one, so the odds were already stacked way against me. Every other smart black person who came through had been killed by the dragon. Which is the dragon of bullshit in the sense that there's no accountability. Universities are a lot like the prison system and the NCAA in that because there's no accountability from an outside force typically there's a lot of corruption. So scholars are kind of given this weird sovereignty where they're allowed to just make whatever decision they want with their, with this ingrained elitism, and they can decide that someone's just not a fit to be hired, and nobody really questions them on it. Nobody really checks them on it. So I remember when I was at Syracuse, I would see really qualified black scholars come through and do interviews. And I say, well, what's wrong with this person? She went to a great school. She worked with the best people in the field. And they'd say, oh, well, she just wasn't a fit for the department. And you'd be like, well, what does it mean to not be a fit? And they wouldn't answer. They would just say she's not a fit. And so unfortunately, in many cases, it's because she's black, right? She's different. You don't understand her. So next thing you know, they hire a white guy or maybe an Asian person because Asians, unfortunately, fortunately for them, they stick together, right? Black people don't stick together so well. So Asian, Indians, etc. They'll tend to want to support and hire people from their own country. So because the United States has this kind of open door kind of ideology, which I'm not gonna say that's bad, it just is what it is. But I don't really think that I could go to a university in Shanghai and have a whole bunch of black people get hired. I just don't think that would really um, go over well, with the people there. So anyway, with that being said, um, the racism in academia, it was really tough for me to deal with because sort of being brought in. There were two other black scholars brought in. We're all assistant professors. We had no mentors. There were no older black people in the department or in the whole business school to look, to support us, have our back. A lot of academia is built on mentorship, and it's not just mentorship in terms of teaching you how to play the game. It's really mentorship in terms of hooking you up and protecting you. If somebody decides to come after your job or decides to destroy you, your mentor or will come in and support you and have your back in a way that allows you to navigate the complex politics of academia. And so with that being said, so I came in with a couple other scholars. One was in marketing, one was in management, and uh, and so we're trying to figure this thing out. We're thinking naively that that your success is built on just how hard you work and how smart you are, how well trained you are, how much you publish, things like that. And then along the way, you find out the reality. You find out that it's not what you thought it was going to be. Now, with that being said, I can remember in my experience that the first 2 or 3 years, really, the whole time I was at Syracuse, I isolated myself deliberately because I wanted to be so dedicated to my profession. All I did was work. All I did was publish. All I did was write. I was literally working 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, including Christmas. And, Christmas I take time off to do whatever. But I was probably, a textbook workaholic in that regard. But I liked it. I've always believed that working hard to accomplish your goals is the best way to get it done. That's the best way to get the most out of your life. I don't regret a single thing. Um, and so that part was okay, but I remember when I got a little bit bored and I wanted to do something different and I wanted to have a plan B, especially once I started to get the sense that because I wasn't a good fit for the people around me, that I may not get my promotion, I may not get tenure. And so on top of that, I remember thinking, there's so many other things that I should be doing as a black intellectual that don't involve writing research papers that nobody is ever going to read. And so So I remember thinking, okay, maybe I can get involved. So I wrote a book, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About College for Black Kids, so they can know how to go to college and do well. Then I wrote another book, What If George Bush Were a Black Man, to talk about the experience of the black male in America. And then I did some other things. I started speaking, and I started doing stuff in media. And you would think that increased notoriety, increased recognition as a leading black scholar in my field would open doors of opportunity, would give me chances to, be recognized, by my colleagues. But it was actually the exact opposite. The more I did, the more backlash I received. The more I was told to sit down, shut up, stay in your place, stop doing this, stop doing that. Especially if I got caught in, say, a racial controversy on CNN or something like that. The thing that happened, this battle between me and Bill O'Reilly back in '07, '08, that just, I mean, blew it off the roof in terms of, just the animosity and the mistreatment. And I clearly had a case of discrimination against Syracuse. I could have sued them for a lot of money, because the racism was blatant. A lot of it was very well documented. People made some emotional mistakes. There's a guy named Pat something who wrote some stuff in an email that you should never put in an email. If you get pissed off at somebody, don't write it down. And so anyway, so I remember when the heat got hot, and I remember thinking about my future and my life. And I remember thinking, okay, I have a choice. I can focus on the small picture or the big picture. And the small picture was, I got these people around me who hate my guts, and I got to fight with these people. How do I get these people to like me enough to not fire me? Because if they fire me, it'll be the end of the world because I have nowhere to go, right? I was blackballed in my field. I mean, in academia, pretty much, if you are kind of an outspoken black person or a quote unquote troublemaker, or you've talked about, suing someone for discrimination, you're not going to get hired by a lot of places. Because remember, universities don't have accountability. So, I pretty much knew, despite the fact that I worked with some of the best people in the world in my field, I knew it was nonsense. This whole idea that we can't find any qualified black professors, that's nonsense. That's kind of another one of the lies that white institutions kind of use to justify their racism. Because structural racism, support for structural racism is typically, supported and justified by people finding a way to explain why black people are the reason for their own oppression. That black people, that their inferiority or lack of qualification somehow justifies their exclusion from the economic system, when really it all comes down to politics. It all comes down to an old boy network. Who do you really want in that position? Who are you most likely to relate to? Who are you most likely to want to support? Well, I've seen a lot of unqualified white guys get a lot of opportunities that they didn't deserve. I mean, but a lot of us have seen that, right? Even if you're not in academia, you've seen that in other places as well. So I'm not here to complain about it. I'm just here to say it is what it is. So as I was kind of figuring this out, I said, okay, let me go beyond the small-minded view. Instead of thinking about the here and now and what's around me, let's think about the future. Let's think about the big picture. Let's think about all the opportunities that the world has available that go outside of the narrow scope of thinking that I was trained to have as an academician. The lack of creativity that is sort of, I guess, given to us, where we're sort of forced to sort of drill into one tiny little niche and take all this enormous skill and think that we can only apply it in one tiny little area. That's one of the biggest wastes of space imaginable. I mean, it's no different from when people think that Earth, it could be the only planet in the entire universe. That people like that obviously don't know how big the freaking universe is. Like they didn't know how ridiculous that is. But if all you know is what's around you, then you can think that, right? So the same thing is true, I think, for academicians. I think that we are trained to think that the world is really small, and that the 20 or 30 or 50 people in our field matter more than anybody else. And I think that cult-like thinking is really promoted just by virtue of the fact that interaction with regular people outside of the ivory tower is really discouraged on a regular basis. That's what cults do. Cults discourage you from associating with people outside of that group, right? So I remember when I would do things with the community or with black people especially, it was kind of discouraged. It was looked down upon. It wasn't rewarded or recognized in many cases. I could go on CNN 4 times in a week, and they would mention nothing about it. But yet, the guy down the hall was in the local paper, and they would say something about that. They would recognize that, maybe give an award or something. And these things kind of matter, right? Getting these awards matter when it comes to getting promotions and raises and things like that. That's what they call scholarly impact and all this other stuff. So anyway, I remember when I got to the point where I was like, okay, what's the big picture here? What are all the things I could be doing with this enormous brain power that don't involve begging this university to give me a job. So that's when I started thinking that it was time for me to challenge myself and humble myself. And what I mean by that is I had to get to the point where I stopped thinking that because I have a PhD, I know everything, and that I'm above and beyond, being someone who needs to be trained and to start all over again. I needed to learn how to hustle in the real world. I needed to learn how to create something that was mine. I had to learn how to basically hunt and kill what I eat, as opposed to waiting for someone to feed me financially. So I literally remember sitting down and just saying, okay, I'm going to study entrepreneurship as if I'm an 18-year-old undergrad again. I'm going to study technology like a lunatic. I'm going to learn from everybody, even people who don't even have GEDs. If they know how to do something, then they're the teacher. I'm the student. And I remember it wasn't easy. It was very difficult, and there was a lot of uncertainty. It was very rocky. But what I found was that when it's almost like leaving a bad relationship. What I found was that once I started finding other things out in the world that I could do that went above and beyond, the confines of academia, my world started to slowly expand. And when you're looking at it's again, compare that analogy to only seeing the planet Earth versus seeing the size of the universe. When you look at the whole universe, the Earth, even if you look at our solar system or the galaxy, the Earth goes from being this gigantic thing to being this tiny microscopic speck. And so when I started seeing the whole universe of possibilities that existed in my life, when I started seeing the whole world, when I started getting involved in situations all across the country, and I started seeing my people again. Um, it did the things happening at my university on my job did not matter to me nearly as much anymore. I did not care. It wasn't that I was trying to win anymore. I truly didn't care. I didn't care if they won or if I won. It wasn't personal anymore. It was like, okay, there's this tiny university in the Northeast that I have a little beef with, but there are 360 million people all across the country that I can engage with. There's billions of people around the planet, and so as I made that transition, what happened was I found that for the first time, being a free scholar was really the first opportunity I had to be a true scholar in my life. I also found that financially, it was so much better off to learn how to have my own business because I didn't have to go beg for a raise anymore. I could give myself a raise. I started doing speaking engagements for $5,000, $10,000 a piece. So when you're making thousands of dollars to give a speech, you don't care if your boss gave you a $3,000 raise that year. It doesn't matter anymore. You're not going to go to a meeting and waste time fighting with somebody to get a $3,000 raise when you can go give a speech and get $6,000 in one day. um, when I started interacting with Black people, it suddenly enhanced the meaning of everything I've accomplished in my life. It gave me something to dedicate my life to where I could justify when I'm by myself, when I'm not trying to impress other people, when I'm by myself and I'm really looking at whether or not this is truly adding value to the world. Working with Black people, teaching Black people was the first time I could actually say, okay, I'm actually doing something that's noteworthy. Because before I'm teaching a class full of white kids, a class full of rich white kids. I'm a Black man who came from humble beginnings. Why in the hell am I in a classroom giving all this financial knowledge to a room full of rich, spoiled white kids? Not that they were bad people, but my own people needed this knowledge far more than these rich kids in my class. To some extent, I couldn't help but to feel like I was an academic nanny, that I was part of the great Black brain drain, the great Black talent drain that takes place every single day. Um, the white community extracts billions of dollars in value and wealth from the Black community, not just financially by getting us to go to the stores and buy Air Jordans and all that, but they extract our smartest people, our most talented people. They take away our most brilliant scientists, scholars, doctors, lawyers, and then our athletes, our greatest athletes. They suck them out. Our greatest entertainers, they suck them out and get them. You got rappers performing for crowds full of white people. You got athletes going out playing football in front of crowds full of white people. Scholars out teaching in front of classrooms full of white people. It doesn't mean the white people are bad per se. I'm not getting into all of that. We know the issues though. It's really to say that we're kind of trained to buy into something that can only be defined as lunacy. I mean, really, something that can only be defined as just really a well-designed mental illness that we've been carefully indoctrinated into to the point that we actually think this shit makes sense. It doesn't make any sense. And what I also saw was I saw a lot of colleagues literally aborting their entire future by sort of being trapped by this microscopic vision that this amazing skill you have can only be applied in one place, and that if that's one place rejects you, then then what you have is essentially worthless. Um, and that to me is very sad because when you see these scholars, they start off and they have all these high hopes and dreams. They all want to go be the greatest this and the greatest that, and somehow they might believe that the only reason another black person hasn't done it before them is because black people were just too lazy or too dumb to try. And that's just kind of stupid. But because believe me, there were brilliant black scientists in the 60s and the 40s and the 30s. They had the same ambitions as you, but these same institutions that are pulling you in and telling you that you got all these opportunities are the institutions that rejected your father, grandmother, and great grandfather when they tried to do the same thing you're doing today. So if you think that you're the first smart Negro who ever lived, then you're out of your mind. If you think that these institutions have been fair and unbiased throughout all history, and that you're just suddenly the first smart black person to come along, you're out of your mind. You got places like Harvard Law School that didn't give tenure to they only give tenure to one black woman in I think a 250-year period or 200-year period. It was a very long period of time. They only give tenure to one black woman, and then they gave tenure to the second one only after Roland Martin and I raised hell over Elena Kagan being nominated to the Supreme Court when she hired 32 people as the dean, and 30 of them were white males. One was a white female, one was Asian. That's what you're up against. That's what you're kind of looking at. So the thing is that when you look at academia, you look at being a black professor. What you're really seeing is that you're being dropped into a very toxic environment. You're being dropped into an environment that is built on psychological and social poison. And what happens is that if we don't know any better, we can be convinced that the best thing we can do for ourselves is to make sense of all this dysfunction as opposed to speaking out about it. I've seen a lot of brilliant black scholars be silenced by this sort of need or hope to earn tenure, which is kind of like welfare for smart people. And I think that the reason we get silenced so easily on this is because we're afraid to consider the possibility that we could still get financial security some other way. I mean, if you really think about it, a lot of scholars don't make that much money. Now, in finance, we did pretty well. But even with the money that I made in finance, I remember saying, well, this ain't the only way I could make money. I don't think I have to sell every ounce of my soul and remain silent on the issues that matter just so I can make a little money, just so I can get this financial security. Maybe there are other ways to get financial security. I remember looking around and saying, well, he's got financial security and he didn't have to make himself into a prostitute. Maybe there are ways to start a business and obtain financial security without feeling like I have to be politically impotent. And so I just decided I was going to go all in. And at that point, the relationship became even more disruptive. I decided to use my tenure process as an opportunity to literally in my papers, when I turned in all my stuff, I did all that. But I wrote a long manifesto and I gave detailed information about my university's horrible record when it came to giving promotions and hiring black people. And I said, this is unacceptable. If you want to show me these departments that have never hired a black person or never promoted a black person in 100 years, and you want to point to me like I'm like there's something wrong with me. No, that's not going to fly, because you need to look at your own, look in the mirror first. You need to clean your own house before you start coming to clean mine. Because I had white teachers in the third grade who saw me do things they didn't understand, who somehow characterized me in certain ways that were untrue. And I said, you know what, my mother fought them back, and now I'm a grown man, though. Now I'm going to fight you myself. So what I would really say to black scholars is you got to find a way to re-engage your people. And don't just do it with this sort of very cosmetic, very weak, just almost this punk ass kind of approach where you think that if you mentor 2 black students a year, you're somehow making some impact on the black community. That's not really an impact. That's not, I mean, don't get me wrong. You've helped 2 people. That's nice. You've helped 2 people get into white institutions, but you've ignored millions of others that could use your brilliance, that could use your talent. Also, don't feel that this university you're with It's okay to go work for them, but don't feel like that's all you got. Don't feel like that's the only way for you to be successful or the only way for you to be recognized as a scholar or to be appreciated for your talent. You've got a lot of talent that goes beyond your ability to serve white people. Um, you've got places you can sell your ability that go beyond getting white people to buy it from you. It's a little bit tougher, I'm not gonna lie, but it's so much more rewarding. So to tell you, just to finish the story, and I didn't even mean to talk this long, but I hope this information is helpful to, especially to young scholars who are trying to figure out what their path is going to be. I'm not telling you not to take these jobs. I'm not telling you not to go into academia. I'm just here to remind you to remember that you always have options, but those options only exist if you choose to see them and if you choose to pursue them, if you choose to invest in them. If you don't invest in them, if you invest all your energy into one thing, then that's that one thing. It's hit or miss. That's it. You're all in at that point. I suggest investing heavily in thing one, but also investing in things two, three, and four, and looking at the value of those things truly from an Afrocentric perspective. Stop looking at it from a Eurocentric perspective, because if you look at it in the way your white dissertation advisor told you to see the world, then you're going to miss everything. You're going to miss your opportunity to truly have a life. You're going to miss your opportunity to truly do something of value to the world that goes beyond putting a Benz in your driveway or giving you some cozy office on the corner with little plaques behind your head that make you feel like you really accomplished something. I can say that as things got worse at Syracuse, and again, I decided, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and just tell them what I think. I wrote my manifesto. I knew I wasn't going to get it. And in fact, the political tricks were pretty hilarious. One day I'll tell you guys about all the funny things they did, all the little lies they told to defend their racism. Racism's easily defendable because people will tend to believe anything that concludes that black people were too inferior to get an opportunity. They can literally say, well, we might be racist, but an elephant came in and ate all of our diversity papers, and that's why we can't hire black people, because black people they sent the elephant or whatever. I mean, just whatever. I know that sounds crazy, but my point is that you can literally say any stupid thing, and people will believe it because fundamentally we've been wired all our lives to believe black people are less than. So any conclusion, it's almost like when a cop shoot a black man, they can give any excuse for why the black man got shot. Oh, he lunged at us. Oh, he looked threatening. Oh, he did this. Oh, he did that. And people will just believe it because they already have a preconceived notion of black people and what we do and what we're capable of, right? So anyway, I had my battle with Syracuse. I wrote my manifesto. I was speaking in the media and what was the I guess it's Issues in Higher Education or whatever that magazine is. I can't remember what it's called anymore. But I remember they interviewed me a few times, and I just was very honest. I said, yeah, I'm going to sue them for racism. And I thought about it, but then I realized I didn't have time. I didn't want to spend 30 years in court. And so I kept building my business. I took all the money I was making from Syracuse and I kept dumping it into my business, because at that point I started saying, okay, this is my lifeline. I've got to make something work here. And so what happened was, as I pushed and built something of my own, as I started reaching to my community, I was met with open arms. I've never been appreciated as a scholar the way black people have appreciated me. I've never had a group of white kids love me as much as the 300 or so black students we have in the Black Wealth Bootcamp. I've never had that feeling, and I can just tell you, it really does a lot for your well-being, because for me personally, it got me to the point where I said, okay, so it's not me. There's nothing. So maybe there isn't anything wrong with me. Maybe it's that system. Even myself, I had to say, because even then I was kind of running on faith, like, well, maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I'm just a jerk. Maybe I'm just not as smart as I thought I was. But when I got that love from my own people, that validation, that respect, um, it really did so much for my well-being, my happiness, even my masculinity, than anything I ever experienced in that predominantly white environment. And so my suggestion is for any person of color who's in an environment where you're being stressed out or you're questioning yourself, you might want to create things where you're turning to people who truly can see the value in your uniqueness. You're not always going to fit into certain environments, but there are places where you can fit. You just have to have the courage to go there. From a business standpoint, I never made more money as a university professor as I did as an independent scholar. So it was definitely a financial boost, but that's not really that important to me. The freedom is tremendous. It's wonderful to do what you want to do and work on what you want to work on. I pretty much for the last 5 years have on a day-to-day basis only worked with black people. That is a dream come true. Now I still have fights with people. Every now and then I still have disagreements, but at least I know it's not because of the color of my skin. I don't even have to wonder if that's the situation most of the time. And so I would just say to black scholars in general, this is my the overall gist of my message. Um, get off the plantation mentally. If you get off the plantation mentally, that opens the door for you to disconnect from the plantation psychologically, spiritually, and financially. Um, you know, get into a situation where you can be appreciated for who you are and not feel that you have to kill off a piece of who you are in order to survive. Life is too short for you to spend all your time just trying to survive. I really encourage you to actually take a chance on finding a way to actually live. So that's all I really want to share. I hope this information is helpful. I know that this was a more of a tailored message. Most of the videos I do are very broad based, and I'm talking to everybody. And in this case, there are things that everybody can learn from this. But this was actually for black scholars who actually care about their community, because I think the community really needs us. In fact, I know the community needs us. And we shouldn't neglect them any longer. I think that there are opportunities. I think you should seek them out. And I think the first step that you want to take is learn how to start your own business. Don't depend on those people to pay your bills forever. All right. Well, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from the Black Business School. Please take care. God bless and have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.